In today's presentation, I'm going to be looking at a very old fig tree that I've been working on for over 30 years. And I think it gives a very important insight into the way in which my bonsai thinking has evolved over time. And it's a good lesson for other people to see that bonsai isn't actually static. So this particular tree that I've been working on, I bought in around about 1990 from a sale of a person's collection called John Stringer. The tree itself was started by Des Slade before it was given to John Stringer, and it was the first decent tree that I ever bought as a bonsai. And at that time it cost me 15 Rand, which at that time was $6 US. Nowadays it's less than $1. What's interesting with the tree is that the bottom left-hand branch was always weak and never quite grew properly. And some years ago, I actually was speaking to Des Slade about that, and it turns out that he actually broke that branch in the 1980s. And it shows the way in which the legacy of that damage has carried through all the way to the present. This is the first picture that I have of the tree, taken in 1995. You can see it's well attached to the rock, looking fairly immature with quite a pointy apex, but what I consider to be a very decent branch structure. Then in the early 2000s, the tree had matured up quite dramatically. You can see that the branches have thickened up, and there's some quite good ramification on the tree. So I was very happy about it and quite excited by the tree at this time. Then it matured again. This is the tree just a couple of months later with foliage on it. And again, you can see that it's got a good structure, but a very formalized left, right, back kind of structure, and really beginning to look rather like a pine tree. So not really a tropical, not really a fig tree, really growing a pine tree. And this was one of the problems that I ran into. Many of my trees were designed as pine trees rather than the species that they actually are. July 2002, picture by the late Rivier at an exhibition, and you can see it's quite an exhibitable tree, but and the maturity is coming in, but still very much with that pine tree shape. 2005, branch structure is quite good. You can see that I have started trying to get some depth into the branch structure here, but on these other branches they're still very flat. So all the twig growth is in a single plane, not creating an up-down three-dimensional shape. The other thing to notice is that there was a very heavy root that developed here and was actually cut off at about that stage, and that scar has carried all the way through until the present. Easter 2006, the tree was really at its height at that stage, in a very attractive pot, well planted, good soil covering, and you can see a very nice mature canopy, but again very formalized in its left, right, back branch structure and very much like a pine tree. And it was at this point where I started realizing these problems with my trees, and as a result of that, some of my favorite trees actually became some of my less favorite trees. So I kept hold of them because of their precious nature, having grown them for a very long time. I mean, I've had this tree by this stage for over 15 years, but it wasn't quite meeting what I was wanting to achieve with my bonsai. And so as a result of that, we can see what the tree ended up looking like some years later. This is in 2013. The lower branches had died off due to apical dominance. The tree hadn't been repotted for a number of years, and it was just generally quite moribund. What you can see is the way in which, you know, the foliage canopy didn't really develop very much, but there has been some maturation and development in the roots. So you can see that the thickness of the trunk has slowly increased over time. It's important to remember, though, that is a very long period of time, from 1995 to 2013. It's almost 20 years of growth, and you can see there has been some thickening, But because the tree's been in a small pot for all this period of time, the tree's matured, it hasn't really engulfed the rock as fig trees can. So if you grow fig trees fast, the rock just disappears completely. So some interesting thickening and some attractive development of age in the tree, but the canopy wasn't doing the right thing. So then the question really remains, what do we do with a tree that looks like this? How do we redesign it? How do we capture it again as a beautiful tree? And I think one of the inspirations or the lessons we can get is from Robert Stephen and his thinking around his book, Mission of Transformation, and where he highlights the way in which a tree goes through multiple phases. You've got the premature phase, the mature phase, which the tree was in the past, transformation phase, which is this period of time from 2008 to 2013, where it went moribund, and then we can develop the post-mature phase. So this is a redesign of the mature tree. Looking in nature, you can see the way in which trees start off as young seedlings. They then become young trees. That's a premature tree. You then get a mature tree and an old tree, or I suppose a very mature tree. You then end up with an old tree, possibly post-mature, and then you get your transformation and ultimately death. And so you can see the tree over its lifespan, it goes through all of these changes. And in this particular slide, there's a very interesting list of all of the kinds of things that happen to a tree as it ages. And it's important, we can use these signs of aging in our bonsai to demonstrate very ancient and mature trees. So this is the work that I set about doing. 2014 was when I started, and as can be seen, I did a fun and impressive demonstration, dazzling people by turning the tree upside down, and that's the advantage of being prepared in what you're wanting to do and doing something dramatic. So here's a series of pictures, the tree as it started, the idea that I had as the design, unpotting it, moving the angle, covering up the roots again, and then repotting it into its new planting position. That was in 2014. And here's what the tree looked like at that stage, just immediately after I'd done the work. So you can see the way in which the leaves are all flat and in the original position, and what will need to happen is the whole tree needs to now readjust its position into its new planting angle. 2 years later, the tree had grown some. It wasn't as vigorous and energetic as I was hoping, but it had grown a bit. What was wrong, we had some problems with the tree because there were some very weak roots at the top. They hadn't really developed very well. And so in 2016, I rewrapped all of the roots and allowed them to actually start developing again. So how do we get some natural inspiration from this tree? Is it actually a natural looking tree? And are we going to be able to create something that looks less like a pine tree and more like a tropical? And interestingly enough, Henny Nell found this photograph in an in-flight magazine from Dwesa Nature Reserve, which is remarkably similar to the idea that I had. And it really shows that there's nothing unique in this world. If you look hard enough, you'll find what you're doing somewhere else. And this is the idea that I'm trying to achieve with this tree. Very dramatic, very dynamic design of this tree jutting out from a cliff over a water body or the sea. So we get to today's demonstration, and what we've got is the tree as the start, and then move through all the different steps of the design and work that I've done. So let's see how we go with that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to clean up the soil surface and then remove this material to see what's happening with the roots underneath or on the rock. You can see the way in which the aerial roots have grown quite significantly out of the pot, and this was all the way down onto the ground below. So very vigorous roots, and it'll be very interesting to see what is happening underneath this tree. I used old t-shirt material to wrap it up with a mulch. Very, very sort of light, fluffy material. Surprisingly quite dry. I was expecting it to be a lot wetter than this. So we've ended up with some quite strong roots. There was considerable weakness in the root system before I put this on. And what we've got now is we've got a couple of good, strong, I think healthy, alive roots at the back there, which is great. I'll carry on cleaning this up. Then we'll review what's happening. So the roots have been cleaned up, or the mulch has been taken off the roots. The problem that I've got is quite a lot of the roots are actually not very healthy and strong. So the roots going down are healthy and strong, but the ones that are actually coming up and over the top of the rock are problematic. They're just not very, very vigorous roots, and you can see that there's been quite a lot of death. So what I'll do is I'm going to try and work out which ones are alive and which ones are dead, take off the dead ones, see what's left, and then we'll make some decisions. These loopy roots here will actually be kept, and then when I repot they'll be repositioned over the rock. So a root like this could actually be very, very helpful and very useful. So let's start cleaning up. You can see that what happened here, this big root came out here. It actually followed the seam of the shirt, looped over and went out and developed this very, very long growth. Clearly not very useful for this tree, and so that would be one of the first ones to actually take off. Take that off here. One good root is this strong root that's come down here. It's very straight, but it's holding the tree onto the rock, and it's keeping this region here alive, which is important for the design. You see, it's a pity that there's these sort of roots here that just aren't alive. Quite like where it's going. It's just a case of getting the roots to actually be more active and more healthier at the top here, which is problematic because it means that the roots are actually, the energy has to go over this top here, and for the plant it just makes so much more sense to actually have roots going down into the soil rather than up and then over the top of the rock before they get to the soil. So probably fighting a losing battle, and we'll just have to see how things develop. If we get, this root seems to be quite good, and then this root here is quite strong, so at least if we've got some that are holding it in position, that would be good. Right, the next stage is probably going to be to look at the branches and work out the branches. The next step is to work on the top of the tree and get the foliage sorted out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to trim all the twigs that are in the wrong place and clean up and shorten the twigs that I want to keep, and I'm probably going to remove all the leaves so that I've then got the structure, the bones of the tree that I can then wire into shape. So let's get going with that. So what you can see is that it's quite an old tree. It's been wired at least once before, and so it'll be we're now building onto that. There we go, structure in. Probably now ready to wire. Yes, ready to wire. Top view of the structure. You can see that the branches, the twigs are all in their own position and they can be finely positioned with the wire. And side view, so that we'll view from the front. So you can see the structure developing. So it will form a very attractive canopy once the foliage is there. Right, time for wiring. So for this tree I'm going to be using aluminium wire. I've got different grades of wire here. Very thin, about 1 millimeter, about a 2 and a 1.5 here. So we'll get going with the wiring. I'm not going to position anything yet, but we'll position once all the wire is on the tree. the wiring is finished. Quite light wiring, didn't need to do a full design wiring. So what we can see is that there are branches that have got wire on them, and there are other branches that didn't actually need wire. So this is part of the refinement process that's going on with the tree. So that's what the tree looks like from the top, and this is what the tree now looks like from the side, so, or front view. What I can do now is I'll actually position the twigs, and then we can start considering what pot we're going to put the tree into. So it really is a case of looking at the flow of the tree and just repeating that pattern in the twigs of the tree. And just carrying on the theme that was established in the first wiring. And what you're wanting to do is get spaces for each of the little twigs to grow in. It's important that you get a three-dimensional movement in the branches as well as just side to side. I noticed with fig trees it definitely looks better if you've got the branches that are doing this. So out into its little bit of sunshine and bring it down. Yes, there's one piece of wire that was missed in this region here. I just need to wire these two branches more into position there. But I think that's quite a good result. I've selected a range of pots to have a look to see which one actually matches this tree quite well. And that's certainly something that I firmly believe in, that we have to actually have lots of different choices so that we can find the right pot. So let's start off and have a look to see what we've got. First one is a brown sort of semi-oval by a very well-known potter in Japan, Gyazon, and that's what the tree would look like if we were to plant it in there. Reasonable, but I'm not sure if that is the best option. Let's look at the next one. Again, staying with rectangular, but this is a much bigger, heavier, stronger pot, Chinese pot, quite similar in nature to the pot that it's currently in, but much heavier, and I think this pot is just too big and too dominant for the tree. What would work well is it would allow the tree to actually grow nicely while it's in this pot. A slightly smaller rectangle, and then that starts looking quite compelling. I think the tree would look quite nice in this pot. So we'll put this pot to the side so that when we have the tree unpotted, we can check to see. Something a bit fun and whimsical. I quite like the idea of having the crabs on the side of the pot to give it some context that the tree is near water. Again, it's worth trying it once the tree is out of the existing pot. We'll just have to see what it looks like. I don't think that it'll work because of the trunk dipping down below the rim, but we'll have a look and see. Another unusual Japanese pot. It's square, and so again quite a nice shape to put this tree into. It's very shallow and it's a small pot for the size of the tree, but with the depth of the square it could probably work. So again, it's a pot that we'll consider, so I'm going to put that to the side as well. We've now got a rectangular pot, again much more containing contains the rock very nicely, and then the tree cascades out the side. With the pot being a little bit deeper, it gives it some stability. So I think this is also a possibility, although the pot itself is quite small, so it might be difficult to get the tree in. Another square, more robust, fancier, with the cloud feet and the flaring rim. Again, quite a nice combination and a definite possibility. But I do think that this is a bit too big and a bit too dominant. But we'll have to see. Another shallowish rectangle, grey pot. I don't think that this pot really works terribly well. Again, because the tree is just coming across and over the rim so sharply. Having a shallow pot like this doesn't really enhance the display of the tree. We now get to the round pots. So a blue drum, Chinese. Again, it would work. I think it's a possibility. We can look at it. It's a cheaper pot, cheaper quality pot, so I think I prefer to go with something slightly fancier. I think that this is one of the definite possibilities. I really like the simplicity of this pot, the smoothness of it, the elegance, and it's a little bit small for the size of the rock, but it really emphasizes the massiveness of the tree, and I think that is very possibly one that I'm going to very seriously consider, and that probably will be the pot, but we'll just have to keep looking. Another round pot, very beautifully old pot, but just way too big and dominant for the tree. If I was going to keep, if I want the tree in a big pot, then I would probably just keep it in this pot and allow it to develop here. And finally, a big heavy drum pot, and again, I think this is very big for the size of the tree. And just a bit too dominant, a bit too powerful and strong. So I don't think that this pot will be tried. So there's a series of pots that we've tried, and we can now go ahead and actually take the tree out of the soil and start repotting it. Now it's repotting time. So I'm going to take the tree out of the current pot and then just have a look to see what it looks like in some of the other pots. Choose that pot and then get it repotted. So let's go. And then you find history inside the potting. This was put in the pot to actually hold the rock in the right position, so the rock was resting on that. I may well use it again. this root can also come in quite nicely. This root here, it is crossing over quite terribly, but it is a good root. As is this root here. So we pass all three of these roots underneath here and then wind them back in there. Now they should actually form quite a nice block there. This root isn't very happy. But hopefully may or may not survive. And then I can pull this root right in here. So it's great. It is actually attaching to the rock quite well. We just have to try and maintain the strength at the top here. Start off with the pots that we were thinking could work. Not a bad tree. That looks okay. Okay, so that's possible. I think the pot needs to be a bit deeper because there's just too much visual weight on the rock, and then having the cascading section coming out, that doesn't quite work. Try this one. It's again deeper, so slightly more powerful pot. The roots have to be crammed in a little bit. Again, not bad. That is possible. But I think the other one is more dramatic and would suit the tree more. Go for the hexagonal. Again, we have to have this weight here or the block to actually support it. Might even consider a wooden block. That also is definitely possible. It looks quite good. Okay, so we've got two options. Let's try the square. Again, very shallow. I suspect it will be the same as the other shallow pots where it doesn't quite work. Although in this case, the shallowness is quite dramatic. It's a good pot. It actually works quite well. It's quite an interesting pot-tree combination. I do feel it's a little bit shallow. It doesn't quite... The tree will feel a bit unstable, and it's a small root volume. The other possibility is to actually put the pot like this and have an edge on, which then visually makes the pot wider. It's also quite nice. But I think the evenness, the symmetry of the pot then just doesn't go with the tree. Okay, so not that one. Right, the blue drum. Again, would work fine. But not exciting enough for me. It's a pot that would work, but I'm not particularly excited by that. There's this pot, which I was quite excited about earlier. But looking at the size, I think it might be quite small and quite difficult to get. You know, we can get the roots in. Quite nice, but I'm not sure. I don't know if that's quite right. Again, I think the pot is a little bit too smooth, too even. Maybe. Quite surprising. But I will check it again and see. And then another pot which I had forgotten to check, but it is a possibility, is this one. We haven't seen it previously. Let's have a look and see how it looks. Again, it's a round pot, but it's got some drama. Might need to raise it up a bit. It's a bit too high, but we'll have to just adjust the block. Again, possibility. Not too sure. Struggling a bit. I feel that square might actually be the best. Might be the best option. Not sure. I think there's too much emptiness on this side, and this side is too full when we're using a round pot like this. Anyway, let's have a look. We'll keep that as an option. So we're now down to 4 options. It would be a case of trying to make a final decision. And then we'll repot. Then we'll pot up. I mean, in some ways this is dramatic. The turning out of the pot, actually I think it's not as dominant as I thought it would be. It's quite nice. So I think this will probably be the pot, but we'll have to see. So, with a bit more thinking, and then we'll pot him up. So I've chosen this pot. I think it is actually the pot that's going to display the tree the best. It's nice to have so many choices, but I think this one will actually work very nicely. I think the shape of the pot, the thickness of the rim, the depth, everything else is actually working well with the tree. I've prepared the pot, so I've put mesh in at the bottom, and I'm going to keep this spacer so that I can keep the rock in position without actually having to worry about the soil settling. What I am going to do is put soil into the bottom of the pot to increase the volume that the roots can explore, and because the spacer is actually the size of the bottom of this pot, I've actually cut out these edges, these corners here, so that the water can actually drain, and also it can then have soil underneath there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get that in, I'll put some soil in, I'll put this in, and then I will need to actually anchor the tree in position, get the roots right, and get the angles right. Okay, so we've managed to get it positioned into the pot properly. It's anchored, it's stable. I can now just get the soil mix into the pot and then tamp the soil down and finish the tree off. I'm very happy with how it's turned out. I think it's looking very dynamic, it's powerful, it's surprising, and a complete transformation from where it was a couple of years ago. And I think this is one of the joys of having old trees, is that you can actually then play around and reinvent them. Very much the transformational tree structure that Robert Stephen talks about. So now we just fill in soil mix and we'll be done. Right. Not sure if this rock will ever get stable enough. I guess as the roots grow and anchor into the pot, it will get better. I do need some dramatic growth. This tree isn't actually as strong as I thought it was. So some regular repottings, feeding, nurturing, and we'll be there. Here we have the final tree in its pot. I'm very happy with how it's looking. The angles are good, it's very dramatic, it's pretty cool. I am quite worried about the back of the tree here, in that these roots are quite weak, and so I will probably pack it with some moss or something that will actually have some proper water holding capacity to create some serious humidity in the back of this area, to get these roots to establish and become strong. We do have this good root which is strong here, and there's another root here which is quite nice and strong, and then these here are fairly healthy roots. So if we could just keep some of these alive, then the tree will be on its way. So there we go. And what we'll do now is we'll just do a rotation of the final tree.